The gentleman's recognized then.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Professor, you were talking earlier with Mr. Kiley about enforcement of judgments, and I'm just curious, what would be the prudent way in which Congress or the courts could review these judgments in foreign countries to ensure that substantive and procedural due process were honored?
So I think, as Professor DeLoe mentioned, there are already standards. So courts are already empowered to review. The problem is that the standard, I think, is too deferential, and so I think the courts should be given a different standard where the presumption is reversed. It could be with respect to certain countries that Congress identifies, like foreign adversaries. Like Congress has identified foreign adversaries. So, okay, these standards should not be given for courts in these countries. That might be one way to do it, right? Which I think would be kind of a scalpel, right? It would focus without sort of creating problems with other countries.
Right, so if you took countries of concern, right?
Countries of concern.
These countries, and would it be like a de novo or almost de novo review of their procedural and substantive processes to make sure that the hearing was fair in the foreign country?
Right, I mean, we do have a standard where they do have to meet a standard of fundamental fairness. I think what I'm worried about is a lot of courts just don't do that. And so maybe the way to give litigants even more is a presumption that the party seeking to enforce the foreign judgment has the burden to prove that the prior judgment was adopted fairly. One of the problems I'll just mention is that it's hard to get access to information on the original court judgment. In China, for instance, it'd be hard to travel there. As Mr. Ma discovered, he can't travel there because he's worried about being arrested. So creating a presumption, putting the burden on the party seeking to enforce the foreign court judgment or the Chinese court judgment would, I think, solve a lot of these problems.
In your experience, Professor, do you believe that when domestic courts are enforcing foreign judgments, that it's almost a rubber stamp exercise?
I wouldn't go so far as called rubber stamp, but it isn't as, I'll just put it this way, it's not as rigorous as other countries. Other countries are much more skeptical of foreign court judgments than on average US courts are. Especially I'll include state courts. And part of it is there's no federal standard.
Thank you for that. And to briefly shift a little bit, what do you suggest just overall that Congress, the executive branch, or even domestic companies can do to stop China from evading trade controls, as an example?
Yeah, I mean, this is a real problem. I think the first problem is admitting that the problem exists. And I think in educating folks to realize that the party state, as I call it, is intertwined with Chinese businesses. And so even if Chinese businesses don't really want to, they are essentially manipulated often or forced to participate in a Chinese strategic plan, which can be nefarious. And I think that is the first step in sort of getting everyone to be aware of what you can do. And then we have tools which we can do to harden our system. What I like to use the term harden. We just have to. We shouldn't change our system, but we need to make it tougher make it harder to manipulate by bad foreign actors. I think disclosure, education, awareness would go a long way to solving some of our problems. But the transshipment problem, I think, might be the solution. Might be empowering the people who know best, the parties that are being injured by the bad actors, to go to court, bring their evidence to court, because I think we just don't have necessarily enough enforcement resources in the United States.
Right. So in the instance of the piping company, that they're much more equipped to recognize the problems in the industry as it pertains to these shipments into the United States.
Right. We've adopted this in other mechanisms as a way, False Claims Act and other ways to enforce. So giving private actors who already have the incentives might be a good way to do that, to make it tougher for transshipment and other types of evasion.
Ms. De La Bruyere, what should U.S. companies and law firms with a presence or operational nexus with China be doing to insulate themselves from risks associated with engaging in this space?
First of all, I think that they should limit their engagement with China to the greatest extent possible, and that's a role Washington can play too. If the U.S. government imposes costs, and in the same way that China does to its entities, calls for a choice to be made between the U.S. and the Chinese markets, that will create an incentive both for U.S. companies to invest at home and to protect themselves from the risks of exposure to the Chinese market, because China is adept at leveraging short-term incentives to which our market entities are very vulnerable in exchange for long-term strategic advantage that will destroy our market entities and our system. So I think there is a role for Washington simply to restrict that exposure or to put costs in it, and at the same time to create greater incentives for investment at home, so that it's not just surrendering things for U.S. entities, it's also gaining a new opportunity.
Thank you for that. Mr. Chairman, I see my time has expired, and I yield back.
I thank the gentleman. We now